But I do want to start off with the Jared Porter firing, as he was fired Tuesday morning after 62 unsolicited and explicit text messages to a foreign female reporter back in 2016. Mets owner Steve Cohen said that in my initial press conference, I spoke about the importance and integrity, and I meant it. There should be zero tolerance for this type of behavior. And, for me as a Mets fan, it's really two things. It's like, I think this is for every fan and everyone that follows baseball. I mean, it's really disgusting to hear that, this stuff still goes on, in sports and baseball, and no tolerance for it for sure. And I think that, Steve Cohen and Sandy Alderson said that, we're going to try to fix our stuff and, what we do to kind of, do those background checks and try to vet candidates. So you kind of weed those people out. So it'll be interesting to see that. And then B, for the Mets, it's almost like a snapback to reality, because it's like all this good stuff was going with Steve Cohen. They got Lindor. They talked about the culture. Everything was going good. And then you have something like this bombshell, and then compound that with the George Springer stuff. To me, it's just like, okay, now it's maybe back into reality. And again, now to me, the most important thing is to see how they bounce back from it, as we're still in the offseason, see what they do with the GM job. To me, it should be really interesting.
Yeah, there are two angles here, and one of them you mentioned is Jared Porter's out of a job after 37 days. And the other one, which, is definitely the more important topic here, is this is kind of proving not to be an isolated situation. You look at what happened in 2019 with the Astros and Brendan Taubman going on a tirade against female reporters after acquiring domestic abuser Roberto Osuna. Unfortunately, this is becoming more of an apparent reality in sports, and really it's the more important discussion over, what are the Mets going to do now?
No, yeah, I agree. And like you said, Andrew, it really kind of ends the honeymoon phase here. But I think that, like Jack was saying, it's more important to look at this as not just an isolated incident. I mean, I think Sandy Alderson said that when they vetted him, they never talked to any women reporters. They never asked anybody else about anyone who was a woman about his qualifications. And so I think that there's just a huge disconnect, and just I think that it also underlied, so 2020, we saw all of these women accomplishments in sports. And then 2021, we snap right back to these accomplishments have not actually made such deep and needed change in the MLB. The organization itself is still fraught with sexual assaults and sexual abuse. And I think that it's something that they can put Kim Ang is somewhere in a great position, and they can be applauded for having a female GM. But deep down, these things are still happening. Even though they have great moves and big strides, there's still a lot below the surface.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's not like a Mets issue. It's not like just the Mets. And the Mets kind of got caught in the middle because they had no idea. And you could talk about, obviously, they should have probably vetted better. They probably should have asked women and all that stuff. But you could probably talk about it more as a whole MLB issue. What about the Cubs, who the reporter told someone in the Cubs organization, and then they were worried about a lawsuit and not what she was going through, which is just crazy. This stuff has to be changed at a fundamental level, as you talk about, the organization as a whole, not just one particular team. So again, it's interesting. And then, we'll see how that goes forward, especially, what Sandy Alderson said, changing the vetting process. And he said, changing the culture of, everything when it goes on to hiring certain employees. And, you talk about Kim Ang being hired, and that's a big step in the right direction. And then you have stuff like this go behind the scenes. It's just, I mean, it's okay, it still exists, which is something that, again, it's disappointing still. And it just shows that we do still have, ways to go.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like there's not much more that I can add, It's great when you see, I mean, even the Red Sox being the first team to have a female minor league coach, and that's great. But there are specific steps that need to be taken to make this a better league-wide situation.
No, I totally agree. And I think it's especially sad for this reporter. She doesn't even do journalism anymore. She left this occupation entirely because of the incidents. And so I think that there was just a huge mishandling in the beginning through the Cubs organization, who said, you should just drop this. We don't need a lawsuit about this. This isn't something that you should do. And she's a foreign reporter, so she also didn't even entirely understand the process. So she just went off of what her advisors were telling her. And so I think that there is definitely a lot to be said just about the culture and how it needs to change from top to bottom in order for these things to be handled correctly in the first moment. So then like 5 years later, it doesn't come out as a scandal. It's something that's taken care of and accounted for immediately.
No, yeah, exactly. And then, you know, you don't have Jared Porter continuing to get like promotions, then he gets to GM and like all this stuff comes out. Like, again, that stuff should have always, you know, should have been gone at the beginning. And then for the Mets, I feel like this is, you know, an interesting situation for them, because now this is the second time in 2 years where you have like a big hire. You talk about the GM last year, the manager, they don't even make it to opening day. And they basically now have to switch back on a whim. Now Sandy Alderson's probably going to assume the GM role. And like, we're in the midst of a hot stove. You have George Springer just signing. Definitely want to get onto that. Like, again, the Mets moving forward, it's going to be interesting to see what they do, because now they got to move really quickly to try to basically pick up all these pieces and continue moving in the right direction, because they were doing it so well. Like, you had the Lindor stuff, you had the signings of James McCann, Trevor May, and it seems like everything was moving in the right direction. And then you have something like this that must spin just the interior of the organization. And to me, that's just, I mean, interesting. And then you have George Springer getting signed like 10 hours after that. And the Mets, I mean, who knows if Jared Porter was in on those negotiations and stuff like that. It's like such a quick turnaround. And like, I mean, again, who knows, like maybe if it was a different situation, let's say this happened a week ago and George Springer was, you know, the Mets could at least stabilize a few things. Maybe they would have paid more money to get Springer. It's just, it's an interesting thing. And again, I think this is, I mean, just for the Mets in this offseason, and it's so important for them. That's just, to me, fascinating.
Yeah, now with assistant GM Zach Scott taking over, you have to wonder if that affects their standing with free agents that are still on the table, you know, because I think Mets fans had really high expectations when Steve Cohen bought this team. And so far, it's been a very eventful offseason with the acquisition of Francisco Lindor. But I feel like a lot of Mets fans were like, okay, now what? You know, and they were still in on those conversations with Springer, who they missed out on. Do they make a move for a guy like Trevor Bauer? And is that even feasible with all the change that's going on in their front office?
Yeah, I think Alderson said that something that they would miss most about Porter was his connections, that he had all of these different connections. And so I think that's a fair point, that if this happened maybe a week ago, would they still be in contention for Springer? Because the hot stove doesn't stop just because the Mets are having a crisis. And so I think that they could have had different moves. And I think that their offseason is going to look a lot different this month before spring training. I think that things that maybe they could have had an opportunity on, they no longer will have this opportunity on, because they're still trying to deal with their own mess. So how can they possibly be going out and trying to persuade anyone to come to their organization right now? They don't even have a GM. So how are they going to tell anyone, oh, look at how desirable the Mets are right now, because now the Mets don't look that good?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the one saving grace for the Mets is, you talk about Zach Scott. He was one of the finalists for the GM job in the beginning when they initially hired Jared Porter. So at least you have someone that you trust as your assistant GM. And I think that's a natural hire to your GM. I mean, I think Sandy Alderson said that it's not going to happen this year, or it's not going to happen just right away. Like, they don't want to rush into anything, but that's someone at least you trust that can at least probably take some of that pressure off of Sandy Alderson.